Lost Art with Andrew Cox, retired Master Gunnery Sergeant. thelostart.podbean.com. Get some merchandise and help support the podcast in getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. Now on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Be a guest, tell your veteran story, discuss your veteran business or organization. Email The Lost Art with Andrew Cox at gmail.com. Andrew Cox, a Teal Valhalla Project Ambassador. See the project story at tealvalhallaproject.com. Thanks for tuning in. Please enjoy the podcast that's giving a voice to our veterans. The Lost Art with Andrew Cox.
Today's episode is brought to you by TrumpShirt.com. TrumpShirt.com is a veteran-owned business where 100% of the proceeds goes to disabled veterans and veteran organizations. Support your veterans by purchasing a shirt at TrumpShirt.com. Use the promo code TLA and get free shipping. That's TrumpShirt.com, promo code TLA.
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Lost Art Podcast, that podcast giving a voice to our veterans. I'm your host, Andrew Cox, and today we'll be having a My Veteran Story. But first, I want to take a second and give a shout out to the Teal Valhalla Project and their incredible work in honoring our fallen heroes. I'm honored to be a part of their team and represent them as a Teal Valhalla Project Ambassador. I encourage you to visit their website, tealvalhallaproject.com, and see what they're all about. Don't forget to go and check out our website. That's thelostart.podbean.com. Go on there, see what we're all about. Click on that merchandise tab, get you some cool gear, and help support our mission here. To all the listeners, thanks for tuning in and continuing to support us and getting our veteran voices out for all to hear. All right, with that, I've got Army veteran Steve Adams. Steve, how you doing?
Doing well. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to hear your story. So you did 21 years in the Army total. That's pretty awesome. It's a long time, long haul. But looks like you did well, finished out your career. That's good. So yeah. Why don't we start at the beginning though? Tell me where you kind of grew up, and then how did you get into military service?
Wow. Yeah, it is a long haul. So, man, we're going to start where did I grew up? So I grew up in Florida. I grew up in Tampa. Okay. And my dad was a Vietnam vet, but when I say Vietnam vet, he never went over to Vietnam. He was an MP. So I grew up in a house always knowing that my dad was a vet. His dad, my grandfather, was he was a vet as well from World War II. He was over in the Pacific and on a ship in the Navy. And his brother, my great uncle, was he was a vet and was over in France and Germany during World War II as well. Wow. So a lot of other people in my family on both sides were vets. And so that's kind of the family that I came from, but I was never pushed towards the military. The trending theme when I was a kid was to be successful, you got to be a doctor, you got to be an engineer, you got to do something professional, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, I mean, I can still remember being a kid and seeing my dad's duffel bag in the garage or seeing my dad's duffel bag in the storage shed out back. And, so there was this military theme, this vet theme growing up, but that was never what I thought would wind up being part of my story. It just so happened to be that I was, chasing the theme that I interpreted growing up, whether it was, real or not. I mean, I started out as an engineering student. I wound up going to school for 3 years in an engineering program. And
there in Florida?
The what?
In Florida?
Yeah, so I started out at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in 1989, and really the only thing that taught me is that I was not cut out to be an engineering student. Um, I after 3 years I wound up failing out, and I wound up going broke. I was trying to afford it all on my own. I was going into massive debt, trying to fail out of school. I mean, if I'm not sure what that says about me. I don't think I'm the only American out there who has, probably gone bankrupt trying to better themselves. So I got to a point in 1992 where I said there's got to be a better life. And you know, no shit, there I was sitting in eating lunch at the school I happened to be going to at the time, which I failed out of Embry-Riddle, and wound up trying to stay in school. So I wound up at Daytona Beach Community College, and I probably had $2 to my name, and I'm trying to eat something in the local cafeteria between classes, and I look up on the wall and there's a Marine Corps poster.
Yeah.
And that probably right there is what got me started wondering, what else, man, what else is out there? Because this sucks. This sucks
Right.
really bad. Here I've been in school for 3 years. I'm broke. I don't have anything to show for it. And I'm probably not going to last because I don't have any more money, and I'm just so burnt out. Can't figure out what I want to do, so there's got to be something better. My girlfriend at the time, we wound up getting married not too long after. Um, she was from Washington. Now I'm from Florida, but I actually graduated from high school in Seattle. So
Okay.
that starts my connection with Washington. I've been a Washingtonian and resident since 1989. So it was always my home of record. Seattle was always my home of record
Oh,
in
wow.
in the Army. So it just wasn't working, and so my girlfriend and I we wound up moving back to Seattle, really out of desperation. My dad was up in Seattle, her whole family was up in Seattle, so we kind of gave up on school. Just couldn't quite figure out how to make it work. Um, yeah, so I wound up back up in Washington. I'm 21 years old. This is in 1992 about, and my impression was I can't find a decent job to save my life
Right.
because I don't have a 4 year degree, and so I was chasing this idea again. I don't think I was too different than the average American. I'm
Yeah,
chasing
absolutely.
this idea. I'm chasing this idea that to be successful, I have to have a 4 year degree. So how am I going to do that, given that I'm not able to finish what I started down in Florida? So, I found myself working for the second Sherwin-Williams paint store. I worked for one in Daytona, and I'm doing deliveries in Seattle for a paint store. And well, that's not really cutting the mustard either, right? So,
Yeah.
again, this idea of going into the military in some branch. I mean, I came from a wide uh, you know selection of branches in my family. I mean, my great uncle was in the Army Air Corps during World War II. My grandfather was in the Navy. My dad was in the Army. I had an uncle that was in the Army, and so it was it's those life experiences that get the wheels turning in your mind about what else is out there. But really, it was about desperation. I mean, I was desperate.
Yeah.
I'm not making any money to survive on. I'm living out of my dad's house at 21. My girlfriend at the time, she's living out of her parents' house, and I'm thinking this isn't okay. This is not the life I want to live for this isn't how I want to start out, and I don't think I'm going to be a professional of any sort if I just continue down this path.
Yeah.
So like many Americans, off to the recruiters, I go to have a conversation. And I wound up at several different recruiting offices, and I wound up with an Army contract. And like a lot of people that sign up, you get put on the delayed enlistment program, and they tell you expect to leave out in 6 months. Well, I was leaving out in 6 weeks, after
Oh, wow, yeah. That's quick.
I'll get to it later, but I mean, that was the second time I went that was the first time I went into the Army, and it played out the same way the second time I went in. So I find myself going to basic training at Fort Benning, and I don't know what the hell these new names are. Even if I knew, I probably I wouldn't give a shit about the new names. So you're going to hear the old original names, and I still have hope that those names are going to revert back at some point one day. So I find myself at 21 going down to Fort Benning, Georgia, going to basic training the first time. One of my claims to fame is I've done basic training twice. So every time people would complain over my career, I'd usually stop them. If they were enlisted guys, they'd come into my office and just start bitching and moaning about something, and I'm like, wait a minute, so let's start off. How many times did you do basic training? Well, I did basic training once. Well, I did that bullshit twice, and the second time was at 33, so you still want to complain. That served as a pretty good attitude check for a lot of people. So I wound up, I had an Army Ranger contract, which I had to do infantry basic training in AIT, and then I went on to airborne school. And then I went on to the Ranger Indoctrination Program, is what it was called back then. I don't know what it's called now. And then if you completed all that, then you got your choice of which Ranger battalion you wanted to go to. Well, since, I'm considering myself a Washingtonian at that point. My wife is in Seattle. Why wouldn't I go to the 2nd Ranger Battalion at Fort Lewis?
Right.
And so that's where I wound up. And at 21, I found myself as a private in the Ranger Battalion, and thought it sucked. I really thought it sucked. I still viewed myself as a very fit college student. So here I found myself in the Army. Really as a matter of because I didn't have a choice. I failed out. I went broke, and but I still viewed myself as a college student. I think in reality, I was chasing two things. I was chasing something different, and I was chasing really money for school, because I always thought that, I'm here temporarily, like a lot of, I saw hundreds of individuals in all the services over 21 years that probably saw themselves in the military temporarily. So, I'm chasing those GI Bill dollars, really, at 21. And so it didn't take long before I realized that life as a private in a Ranger battalion in the Army, it sucked ass. It was not the life that I wanted to do. If any viewers out there, know of that life, it's not easy. It really wasn't easy, especially as a married guy, as a married junior guy. It really was not easy. So it wasn't too long before I started wondering, I signed up for, the Ranger contract, and I signed up to do this one thing for 4 years in the United States Army, but what else is there? I mean, do I have a choice? And I found out that you kind of do have a choice if you know how to work the system. It wasn't long before, we're going to make a big old jump here. It's not a jump in time, it's a jump in jobs. I found out that I could go over and go ask for a job at the I Corps headquarters at Fort Lewis on Main Post going TDY to a tropical location every quarter out of the year, getting paid TDY dollars. My first line supervisor was an 04 or an 05, and I'm working a cush Army job.
Very nice. Okay.
Why wouldn't anybody want that? And I always know that at the end of my 4 years, I'm done. I'm getting out. Might as well spend it doing something I want to do, traveling the world, because that's what the recruiters always sell you on, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So that's what I wound up doing. And that's how I finished a 4.5 year contract. We're doing something totally non-standard. Here I am. By the time I get out after 4.5 years, I was an E4. My first line supervisor was at any given time an 04 or an 05, working for some of the smartest people I had ever known, traveling the Pacific Rim. 3 to 4 times a year, doing these exercises where, maybe we slept in a tent, normally a nice hotel somewhere around the Pacific Rim, for a couple weeks at a time, living the life.
Right.
But I always knew I wasn't going to get back into the classroom that way. So 4.5 years go by, and I say goodbye to the Army, because I knew I had. I knew in order to be successful, I knew I had to have a degree. I don't feel that way anymore. In fact, between me and my wife's 3 kids now, I feel like, man, I'm encouraging all of them to consider all their other options and first before going broke and possibly following the path that I did, which wasn't totally bad, but it wasn't 100% successful either. There's a lot of pain involved there. A lot of life lessons learned.
Yeah.
So I wound up back in school. I had GI Bill dollars in my hand, but that Montgomery GI Bill back then was nowhere what the post 9/11 GI Bill became. I mean, I was making pennies on the dollar, still eating bologna sandwiches every day, trying to get through a 4-year degree. Eventually I did it. I was out of the Army. I had an 8-year break in service. And during that 8-year break in service, I finished total of 3 degrees. I had started 2 additional careers. My undergrad degree was in forestry. I practiced forestry in Idaho, Washington, and Northern California. At one point, I wound up going back to school for an MBA degree. I wound up and all 3 of my degrees are from Washington. So Washington plays this huge theme in my whole story. So I wound up finishing my MBA degree, and the idea was to go back in the forest industry with that advanced business degree. But the industry wasn't having it. And 9/11 at the end of my first year in business school had happened. And, we as soon as 9/11 happened, we immediately went into Afghanistan. We had special operations troops immediately in Afghanistan. And it was about a year, 18 months later, we were full on back into Iraq. And as soon as we went into Iraq, I wound up, I was beginning the 2nd year of business school. And I was feeling a little bit guilty because at that point I was, 31, 32 years old. I had, still very fit, kind of felt like I shouldn't be sitting in a classroom at that point, kind of felt like I should be in Iraq. And really, nobody at that point, nobody was talking about Afghanistan. It was all Iraq.
Right.
And so, and so, I thought, I maybe I shouldn't be sitting in a classroom. Maybe if I have skills to contribute to the fight, maybe that's where I should be. So, I think it was the first or second day of my 2nd year of my MBA program. At lunchtime between classes, I went to go see a recruiter again. And I told him, I said, I will put my 2nd year of grad school on hold if you can somehow get me back into the Army and somehow get me into a unit in some branch, some MOS, I don't care what, that has me in Iraq in a very short period of time. In fact, I think I gave the guy like 30 days or something.
Oh, wow.
And he said, let's see what I can do. He goes, man, we are like really hurting to fill spots, and we might be able to do that. So at that point, I mean, I'm at the tail end of an 8-year break in service. He calls me up at the end of the day. He goes, I got some bad news for you. He goes, I've been on the phone all day long with the G1 at the Pentagon trying to get you a waiver to keep you from having to redo basic service or redo basic training all over again, because that's what I'm being told. You've been out for so long. If you come back in, you have to redo basic training. And
Wow.
I'm like, brother, that's going to be a deal breaker, because for all I know, I mean, it was like day 1 or day 2, we were back in Iraq. I said, for all I know, this is going to be Desert Storm Part 2. And here I am signing up for a 4 to 6 year contract, putting
Yeah.
putting the second half of my graduate degree on hold, and for nothing. So he was not able to give me that waiver. The regulation had just changed. It turns out we a lot of Americans were signing up for the military, and a lot of vets were coming back in, and the DoD was making some big mistakes at that time, putting people back in uniform that were not fit. B, had no business coming back in without redoing basic training. So
Right.
they just changed it at that point. And I said, that's going to be a deal breaker if you can't give me a waiver. And oh, by the way, you can get a waiver for everything in the Army.
Yeah.
And so I gave him another day. And at the end of another day, he wasn't able to do it. So I told him, I said, that's the deal breaker, and I'm going to go back to class. And I don't know, maybe we'll talk again later. I don't know what's going to happen. But what I wound up doing was going back to school. I finished my graduate degree, and by that time we've been in Iraq for a year. We've been in Afghanistan for going on 2 years at that point. Still, nobody's talking about Afghanistan. And so I wound up. What I found was that the more degrees I had, it was like the less employable I was. The forest industry didn't want me because I didn't have a graduate degree in forestry. They couldn't figure out, even though I was explaining to the forest industry what I wanted to do with my business degree in forestry, the forest industry wasn't having it. And so I found myself with massive debt, still in debt. All I keep doing is just adding to it. I'm working as a vet. I'm working as a security guard with a brand new MBA degree for the local refinery, and I'm doing shift work, and I'm working with a bunch of other vets. I'm working
Yeah.
for a retiree, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But it's not getting me to where I want to go. And I'm never going to buy a house doing it. I'm not going to raise a family on it, most likely. That's not where I want to go. And so one day, I happen to be at home. I'm off work, and I look up online the DFAS pay scale. And so a lot of years have gone by since I was a private, and I'm wondering, well, I qualify to go back into the military now as an officer. What if I just go back in? I go to officer candidate school, because I had already researched that was the fastest way to move up on the pay scale, because I didn't like what I was being paid as a private. That sucked.
Yeah.
So I'll never forget the day that I printed off the DFAS pay scale, and I wasn't looking at the lieutenant years. So back then, you could you automatically get promoted to first lieutenant, and back then it was an automatic promotion to captain. So I was looking at the captain years, which were only 3 years away. And I knew that I would be on the extended prior enlisted scale. So things are looking pretty good looking at the pay scale.
Right.
On top of it, I had not had any medical insurance in years.
Yeah.
And some of the debt that I had was some medical debt from not having any medical insurance. So I knew right away, right away that if I just went back in, I didn't care what I was making. At that point, I didn't care if I had to redo basic training again. So there I was going back to the recruiter. And first I went to my wife and I took her to the DFAS pay scale. And I said, what would you think if I went back into the Army? And her attitude was, hey man, whatever floats your boat, whatever makes you happy.
Nice. Okay.
And if you have a decent income, then that's even cooler. And if we get back onto, our Army medical insurance coverage, then that's icing on the cake too. So yeah.
It's a win all the way around with it then.
It's all the way back around. I'm back in to see a recruiter. Recruiters start salivating when they realize somebody who's capable of getting an OCS contract walks through the door. I'm under the impression that one OCS contract equals like 6 or 8, enlisted contracts.
Oh, wow.
So they get a lot more credit. They pretty much, make their quota with one guy for that month. So there I was. I'm signing an officer candidate school contract. And the same thing plays out again. I get told you've got like 6 to 9 months before we can get you a slot. I walk away, and within days, I get a call that says you're leaving in 30 days. So in 30 days, I'm back in basic training. I'm 33 years old. I'm back in basic training. I'm still very fit. And I'm viewing basic training as really kind of a primer getting ready for officer candidate school, having no idea what OCS entails. But I can tell you basic training had really not changed. The stories were changing. Some of the drill sergeants were now combat vets.
Right.
The first time around, there were some Desert Storm vets, but not like this time around. And so wound up finishing up basic training, go to officer candidate school at Fort Benning. And, that was kind of an ass kicker. It's 4 months long. It's not 9 weeks. So you're in there with senior people. Most of my officer candidate school class was heavily dominated by E7s. Lots of E7s. Wow. There's some E8s in there. Some of those senior people were washouts in the first couple of days. It was not what they thought it was going to be either. And so I wound up finishing all that after 4 months and some change. And here I am. I'm an instant lieutenant. Like I've always said, that is the way to go. 4 months later, you're an instant lieutenant on the OE1 pay scale. I'm getting credit for like eight years worth of service already. I'm getting paid more than my peers. And since I had been an airborne ranger many years prior, the Army personnel coding system automatically stuck me into the airborne community. So I got commissioned. I got commissioned as a combat engineer. But since I had already been to airborne school, I find myself being sent to Fort Bragg to an airborne combat engineer unit. And, I thought they were going to send me, to, like an airborne refresher or something. Here I am, 33 years old, going on 34. And they're sending me to an airborne unit. And there's no airborne school refresher. There's no nothing. You're just expected to put a parachute. Literally, I was expected to put a parachute on my back after being out of the Army for I don't know, going on 10 years, and and have no questions about it. That really happened. And so I get to my first unit as a lieutenant. Again, still nobody's talking about Afghanistan. It's all Iraq. But I get told as soon as I get to this airborne engineer unit, in 1 year, you and your platoon, as a platoon leader, you guys will be in Afghanistan along with the rest of the battalion. And that's what happened. That's what happened. I mean, my first year as a platoon leader was, yeah, man, it was a lot of fun. It's kind of an eye opener when I get privates coming to me saying, "Hey, you know, you're my dad is as old as you." So I had guys in my platoon I could be their dad, but still running and gunning every day. I mean, I was very fit and really kind of loving life. I mean, it was good. So in 1 year, sure enough, found myself in Afghanistan. And once again, all the news stories were all Iraq. Like Afghanistan in 2006 to 2007, getting zero press. It wasn't until the end of 2007, we're getting ready to come home, that there was a shift. And I don't quite remember what made that shift, but there was a shift, and Afghanistan started to get bigger.
Right.
But by that time, you know, I had spent close to 3 years as a combat engineer. I'm a first lieutenant by now, and I'm kind of getting bored. I don't really, you know, want the next couple jobs that I can see coming up as an engineer officer. So I wanted something different. I wanted something maybe more challenging. And I had worked with some civil affairs guys on that first rotation to Afghanistan, and I thought this is kind of cool. You know, it's a much smaller environment. The mission is smaller. It's more detailed, and it still puts you on the front lines as far as you know. I mean, it actually kind of broadens your front lines, because I knew that the civil affairs mission in the Army, it was a special operations mission, and it had the ability to really put me anywhere around the world for not just continuing with Iraq and Afghanistan missions, but also for non-standard special operations missions. So while I'm at the end of that deployment, I wound up applying to switch my branch. And I was pretty sure at that point I was too old for special forces. I know plenty of other guys that did it. I know some guys who are older than me that did it. For me, it wasn't cool. And I at that point I still couldn't figure out what PSYOP guys did. So out of the three main Army branches, civil affairs is what it was, and wound up being accepted before we even got home. Special operations at that point was hurting on people. And by the time I got home, I got accepted. I got my branch changed. The engineers were not happy about that because they're losing a guy. And within a matter of months, I find myself at the Special Warfare Center and School, just down the street from where my engineer unit was. And that started the next year and change of a special operations career before I got assigned to my first civil affairs battalion. So here I am. I'm still a lieutenant at that point. I'm a first lieutenant. I'm a senior first lieutenant, and no, I had to go to the captain's course first. So you know, I'm in the captain's course. I get promoted to captain. And then I come back and start the SWCC pipeline at Fort Bragg for civil affairs, and then that was a year long. So 18 months later, I find myself in my first special operations unit. That was in 2007 to 2008, and start running and gunning doing that. You know, I trained up for a year to go to Pakistan. That wound up being canceled. You know, I got to start seeing the politics that were involved, especially when we are trying to put special operations troops around the world. in very hotly contested environments and areas like Pakistan, where we were not really admitting at that point, around 2007 to 2009, that we had troops in Pakistan. But here, me and my 4-man team of civil affairs guys, we were training up for Pakistan. I wound up not going. My team sergeant wound up not going, and my civil affairs NCO wound up not going because we couldn't get visas. Here we are. We're trying.
Really?
We're trying. The embassy and the Department of Defense, SOCOM, is trying to get us into Pakistan, but Pakistan and Pakistan wants us. I know how many troops are there, but they won't give us a visa. We have to have a visa to go to a combat zone that isn't really being talked about. And so me and 3 of my 4 guys, we go back to our unit and to start training up for a different mission. I had one guy that wound up going because for whatever reason, Pakistan gave him a visa. He dovetailed into a team that had 2 other guys on it. These 2 guys wound up taking me and my team sergeant's positions because, like my medic, they wound up getting visas for a combat zone. I mean, think of it that way.
That is crazy.
It was pretty nutty. And so it was also an environment where you go in there and you can't figure out necessarily who your boss is because you have 2 bosses. One's an ambassador, and then the other is a ground combatant commander. And the 2 of them are trying to work together, but really it's the State Department in Pakistan that's really controlling everything. And the DoD assets are kind of the State Department's toy at that point.
Right.
So that was kind of one of my first points in time in my career where I thought, man, like I'm here because of luck. There were a number of times in my first Afghanistan rotation where I thought, I'm still alive because of luck. Luck is getting a play here. The enemy gets a say, so does luck. In Army planning, hope is never a course of action, and luck isn't supposed to be either. But I called bullshit on that pretty early on because I was still alive because of luck. And here I was not going to Pakistan, and neither was my team sergeant. We get replaced by 2 guys who got killed by a VBIED. So once again, that was a pretty big check on luck at that point. So I train up for another mission. I go off to Cambodia. Turns out, a lot of people were asking, why in God's name are you going to Cambodia? We got people, at this point, we're starting to pick up the fight against Boko Haram in Africa, and we're all, by this time, everybody in the government is admitting we're in Pakistan. The fight is now very heavy in Afghanistan, and Iraq is becoming a shit show. So here I am in Cambodia. My special operations language is Thai. And there were a number of reasons why I was in Cambodia. There were reports of a very tall, 6'3" plus Middle Eastern guy walking around in the jungle. There was actually some thought that Osama bin Laden, which at that point we have no clue where this guy is, could be somewhere in Southeast Asia. Wow. And so, I'm there as a civil affairs guy. I'm part of a joint special operations team. I'm working every day with special forces. I'm working every day with PSYOP guys. I'm working with all the different 3-letter agencies out of the embassy in Phnom Penh, and life is pretty good. I mean, I had kind of an unlimited budget to spend on a rental helicopter. I had, so those are the types of resources that I had to be able to conduct that particular mission with. And then, so I get
while you were there in Cambodia, like what was your mission that you were doing there?
Well, generally, it's no secret that generally the civil affairs mission is access and placement, number one,
Mhm.
for other assets, and number two, for the main overt mission, to provide humanitarian assistance and resources that provide that access and placement.
Yeah, makes sense.
So civil affairs work tends to be pretty easy because it's very overt. Um, you find a lot of SF guys, you find a lot of PSYOP guys, naval special warfare guys. I think they get kind of envious because their work is not overt. I get to stay. I wound up being able to get to stand in front of reporters and cameras and talk openly about what we did and about the great resources and benefits and impact that the United States government is bringing to wherever I happen to be. And so, yeah, that's kind of the gist of civil affairs work. Now there's the other side of it, dovetailing into intel assets. Helping out guys from other branches do what they do. It's not uncommon to work with other three-letter agencies. The whole access and placement concept is pretty key. It looks a little weird if you wind up having a bunch of white American males walking around in some place around the world where you don't really fit into if you don't have a really good reason to be there.
Right.
But when you have a really good reason to be there, it's not so strange. And when we build schools and medical clinics and we provide assets for those types of things around the world, it gives us a reason to be in places where normally people would question us. But
Right.
When you're bringing the goodness of American assets around the world, then and you're based out of the embassy, people tend to stop asking questions because the Americans are here to help.
Yeah.
And
Makes sense.
so I continued on with that career in civil affairs. I wound up going to a number of different duty stations, all while coming back to Fort Bragg. Fort Bragg was always home. And did another tour in Afghanistan with another civil affairs unit. That was the first tour was a year and a week, and the second tour was 9 months. So did Cambodia first, then went to the second tour of Afghanistan. Came back from that, went and sat in a classroom for a year and a half at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, doing the typical major thing. Got promoted to major there.
Hey, to all the listeners out there, we've been talking about it already, but if you're struggling, you feel like you're wanting to hurt yourself, anything like that, the VA does have some good resources. You can always dial 988, press option 1. You can also text 838-255, or you can go to veteranscrisisline.net, click on that chat icon. Any of those options are going to be able to put you in contact with somebody that's going to be able to help you out. But remember, one veteran life lost is one too many. So please reach out for help. I care about you. I know Steve cares about you. The whole veteran community cares about you. So please, please, please reach out for help. All right, Steve, I appreciate you, man. Thank you for coming on. To all the listeners, stay motivated, change your socks.